Thank you, Ari. And I thank you both for the introduction, but for your 21 years of enabling Jewish learning, all the more during this last year and a half. It's a privilege to share time with Micha Odenheimer, a friend from Jerusalem. We've known each other for over 20 years when our sons shared fourth grade together during my first sabbatical in Israel. And Micha, you have been a gift to me both as a friend, but also as a social activist. So as Ari noted, our key focus in this conversation is about the work you've been doing since 2007, the last 14 years with Tevel B'Tzedek. As Ari noted, you were a journalist before you became involved in creating organizations. The first organization you created was an organization on behalf of Ethiopian Jews in Israel, having helped write about them and even enable some to come. So just the paragraph, that was your first entry into social activism from being a journalist. What prompted you to go from being a writer to a organizer?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like I went through a kind of a transformation in my 20s. I was mostly a Luftmensch. I was very interested in Hasidism and Kabbalah and spirit. And then becoming a journalist was one movement towards more activism in a way. And then another turn was to actually start to do things actively. What prompted me was I'd spent a lot of time as a journalist in Ethiopia from 1990 to 91. And I had seen I'd seen the community there, and I knew that it was a strong community with very good values. And even though they were very poor, they had its unique spirituality. Then I saw them coming to Israel and being sort of fed into a system that already existed, that I was afraid was going to damage their chances of truly integrating, and that enraged me. So I'd say that my first motivation to become an activist was anger and at injustice. And I said, no, this can't happen. It was mostly about the educational slots, or how they were being tracked for education, because they came illiterate. Many of them came, they might be 10 years old, 12 years old, not know how to read, and they were being sent to vocational education. But I saw that wasn't going to get them a future. So we really fought to get them the kind of future that would enable them to matriculate, go to college, and become, really have dignity in their new society.
Now, you were the head of that organization for a number of years. A word about how you turned it over to Ethiopian leadership and where that left you.
Right. So from the very beginning, I was looking for Ethiopian leadership, but because it was an advocacy organization, which meant really trying to fight the government on certain policies and change the government. So most of the Ethiopians had grown up in communism. The ones that were adults and had grown up there didn't have that kind of mindset to be able to fight a government for their rights. So it took a while. It took about 5 years till I found the right Ethiopians who had grown up in Israel and could take on that role. And so when I did, then I stepped down and I went back to writing and to teaching, and still supporting the Ethiopian cause from without. But that's what I did.
So then, how did you take on or see the vision for Tevel? First, say what Tevel means, Tevel B'Tzedek, and how that became your next social activism.
So Tevel B'Tzedek means, it's from the Psalms. It's actually a phrase that's 3 times in the Tehillim, in the Psalms. It's also twice in our Kabbalat Shabbat, in the prayer when we're receiving Shabbat. And it means, Tevel means the earth, or the populated earth, the civilized earth. And B'Tzedek means, of course, with justice. And the way I got to it was, to this kind of activism, was Ethiopia was also the starting point, because in Ethiopia, I was there a lot during the year. I was there in Operation Solomon. Then I decided to stay after Operation Solomon. The rebels had surrounded Addis Ababa. I stayed for the rebel entry. And then I began to see that I can do that kind of reporting, and it was very exciting. So I went to places like Haiti and to Somalia and many, the kinds of places that I already mentioned, reporting from crisis areas. And I became very interested in what was happening to the majority populations in these countries during the age of fast-track globalization. Communism had kind of fallen, the Soviet Union had broken apart. It was a moment of triumph for the United States and Europe and for capitalism, and we were all going to become one great big global economy. And I was interested in what was happening to these very poor populations who weren't really integrated into that economy yet. Everywhere I went, and I started to think about it, to write about it, to read about it, and also to think about it from a Jewish point of view. What do we have to say? When I was in Yale, I met this Black Muslim, and he said, I remember him saying to me, "The problem with you Jews are, you know there's one God, but you don't tell nobody." And I felt like, okay, I understand we're not missionaries, but I felt like now with globalization happening, with us all understanding how much we're influencing each other, it is time at least to put forward a Jewish vision of what the world should look like, what justice should be, what justice looks like, what economics looks like, what is our vision for humanity. And that interested me a great deal. And then when I was in 2005, I went with my family to India for 2.5 months. And there I saw how many young Israelis were traveling in India. And many of them longed, they even call it the Hummus Trail. And many of them really longed for something deeper, but didn't really have a way to take their travel one step further into really understanding the cultures, what was happening there. And that's where I came up with the idea of Tevel B'Tzedek, which meant the earth and justice. Like if we're going to travel all over the world, if we're going to be influencing all over the world and influenced, then we should have this value of tzedek in mind. And that's where I got the idea of starting the organization.
Now, the Israelis that you saw were primarily, I assume, Israelis post-army. So they were in their own gap year or years. And what did you... So this conversation in significant part is about your own journey over these last 14 years and how Tevel has unfolded. What was the initial, how did you start it? What was your initial vision?
So my initial impulse was, let's use the fact that Israelis are already, on the ground in all these places and help make these young people a bridge between Israel, Judaism, and the problems of global poverty, which I saw as a deep blight on humanity and a deep problem that needed to be addressed. And so that was my initial thing, was to bring them. We chose Nepal. I went back and looked around India, Nepal, chose Nepal as the first place we were going to work, brought a group of Israelis and a couple of Americans actually also as well on the first group. And we studied together. We studied the language, Nepali language and culture, and trying to understand the politics, globalization, poverty, and then a lot of Judaism and social justice and understanding what that means. What is the Jewish vision? Is there a Jewish vision of the social justice? And then have people go out and volunteer for 3 months in various organizations in Kathmandu. But very quickly realized that the problems we were seeing in the cities, problems of street children and women who had been trafficked, and in fact the slums, really had their origins in the rural village, or what I call the subsistence farming villages that were until now had been growing food only for themselves, but now we're really in crisis and we're being sucked out towards the slums or towards very difficult work conditions. And we talked about it a lot in the group and decided that that was a direction that we wanted to go in. We wanted to get to the roots. We saw that as the roots of poverty. We wanted to get to the roots of poverty to help those villages become more sustainable, to become places of opportunity. And that's the direction we took. fairly early on, within a year or two of beginning the organization.
So give an example, and I know a big project is the area of Ramichap in Nepal in more recent years. Talk about the kinds of work that Tevel began to do in those rural settings and the goals.
Okay, so first I'll start with an earlier iteration, which was an earlier version, which was there was a group, we were attracted to this area, which was by a river, and there were many people, about 5,000 people, who were breaking stones by the river to turn into asphalt, to turn into part of the components of concrete or asphalt. And we tried to help them, but we realized we couldn't really give them a whole different way of making a living. But parts of them were from villages above the river who had been part of a very low caste fisherman caste for many, many years. But the river had now been diverted, and there were no longer, and also because of all the stone quarry activity, there were no longer fish in the river. And this is a story, by the way, I've seen repeated many, many places, how people rely on rivers and fishing and hunting, and then that, the ecological consequences of development takes away their living. But they did have land, but they didn't have irrigation, and they didn't know how to really work the land beyond planting a rice crop once a year. So we started there, and we started to teach. We built a model farm, which incidentally we're also doing now in Zambia, and we've had the help of one of your congregants, Gary Carmel, in memory of his wife, Ronit, has helped to sponsor our work in that regard. But in any case, we started building model farm, teaching, working with the women. When we got there were no toilets. They didn't understand that, that there was a connection between disease and open defecation. So we had to get the women to the point where they understood they wanted toilets, and then we built biogas toilets, and that also helped the farming. Very, very successful project. Then we moved on. That was only a few hundred families. We had another couple hundred families in another area. Then we moved on to Ramichap, where you're talking about, where we took on more like 2,500 families, like 15,000 people. And there also we always work in groups. Our emphasis, and I feel it's a very Jewish emphasis, is on how important community is. Community is really the strength of what these people in the villages have. So we work with farmers groups, with women's groups, with youth groups to change agriculture, to help organize leadership, to connect to the markets. The women and the youth are very, very important, and the women take on a huge, huge role in creating change and transition. And we actually sent a group to assess. We were in Ramichap for 5 years, including during the Nepali earthquake. We sent a group to assess what happened 3 years after we left. We just got a report back, and we were very happy with the results. There's still hundreds of families that are making a living through small-scale commercial agriculture that we helped to introduce, with beekeeping. Almost every family is growing vegetables in kitchen gardens, and their nutrition is improved. And more than that, we also help through these organizations, these groups, to end caste discrimination and gender discrimination. Because people saw that they could really work together. Of course, everything you do, you have to do it as a process and very gently, and have the community hold the lessons and learn the lessons by themselves. But so we're very proud of that work.
So you have success in a place like Ramichap. Teach us about, you have a country like Nepal as a focus, so much poverty. Where does it feel a Jewish value to make a difference, and to make a difference, again, that's not changing Nepal? Why put all that energy for a few thousand?
Well, it says you never know what. First of all, as it says in Judaism, every human life is like an entire world. And of course, we all cherish our own lives, and we're only a very small part of the world. But from a spiritual perspective, each person, as you get closer to his emotional center, he really becomes an entire universe. So if we change one life, we change the life of a community, that in itself is something very remarkable. But another lesson I think that's very important is that we also don't know what small changes can bring. So there's a value in the changes themselves. If we've worked with altogether more than 50,000 people all over the world, so that has a value in itself. But at the same time, we change the lives of young people, we change the lives of our volunteers, we change the lives of our Nepali or Burundian or Zambian or Haitian interns. They go out and they change other people's lives, and we really don't know what happens with, sort of the butterfly effect. I know that lives have been changed in terms of the volunteers who come to, for example, we now have a Knesset member who was one of our volunteers, and then a staff member, and through that became a very important student politician. And now he's a member of the Knesset in Israel, and he's going to help us hopefully expand Israel's development policy in general. So you don't exactly know, from little becomes great.
So in regard to your volunteers, how much time do your volunteers invest in the work of Tevel, the Tzedek?
So our classic program has been 4 months. We've also had 1-year programs for somewhat older people. People in their late 20s and who are really trying to do this in a more professional way. So 4 months, 1 year, 1 month. We have also 1 month programs that we call that more cultural exchange, but that's also had some people has had, tremendous impact. And of course, the work itself is led by the local people, local hires, or local organizations that we're supporting that are there long-term. So the volunteers are coming and they're contributing, but they're not responsible for the long-term work. I wanted to say one other thing, that part of what, and you were asking about the Jewish component, for me, part of it is to show young Jews, young Israelis, a expanded horizon of Judaism. I feel that a lot of young people are placed in this position where they feel like either I have to choose to be a Jewish Jew, kind of particularistic, inner-oriented, the survival of the Jewish people, or I'm a universalist and I care about the world. And the challenges facing the world today are so great. I feel that it's very important to integrate those two things, not to see those as an opposition, but to integrate them and to understand how we can draw deep inspiration from our own history and our own sources towards solving these great issues and problems of the world. So part of my intention was also to create a new horizon for Israeli Judaism and also for American diaspora Jews joining in with Israel to try to contribute to the world what we can contribute, which I feel is deeply, deeply based in Judaism. The idea of, sort of the messianic idea of human transformation and creating a Garden of Eden on earth.
My wife Linda and I had the privilege to be in Kathmandu with a group of your volunteers completing a 2-month, I believe, service. And we spent Shabbat with them about 4 years ago. What impressed me was, one, how they got along and with each other, that they had formed such strong bonds volunteering together, and that in sharing Shabbat with them in the Kathmandu Tevel Central, that they were very diverse in their religious background, some being secular, almost no Jewish background, some being modern Orthodox, and yet having a traditional opportunity to pray. Minority prayed traditionally, but all shared in a traditional Friday night Shabbat, that felt very self-expressive for them. Talk about the diversity of religious backgrounds and what you find is gained Jewishly for your volunteers.
Well, there's an expression that's called a TAZ, which means a temporary autonomous zone, which means if you enter into an experience, an immersive experience that you know is temporary, that you can use it to experiment with parts of yourself that you might be reluctant to otherwise. So I've found that many young Israelis who are secular, and the last thing they would do is to explore Shabbat in Israel, because there things are so politicized. They'll come to Tevel B'Tzedek, and for the first time, because they're in a temporary autonomous zone, they can explore their soul's connection to Shabbat or to davening, etc. I have to say it works the other way too. There are religious Jews who explore what it is not to be religious in the same temporary autonomous zone. But I think that for many people, many young Jewish people, both from diaspora and Israel, what's most affecting to them is the connection between understanding how central social justice is in Jewish text and Jewish learning, and also seeing how that applies even today. So, for example, the two of the primary social justice mitzvot, the Jubilee, which has to do with land redistribution, and the forbidding of the mitzvah to loan money with no interest to the poor, if only some version of those two things were accomplished in the third world today, I'd say 80% of poverty would be solved. So there's still a tremendous relevance, not necessarily in a literal sense, one-on-one, but in the spirit, and to understand that these issues, questions of justice and of economics, have been argued about and put forward as values for thousands of years. They're not new. I think gives a lot of legitimacy to people in realizing that they don't have to take the status quo as something, as a given, but they can really fight to change and make a better world.
Now, Tevel, I'll just pause. We're focused on Nepal, but has also made contributions to Haiti after the earthquake with alum of Tevel, was in Burundi in Africa, and is now just beginning to develop its footprint in Africa. And again, as you noted, a member of our Orange County community, Gary Carmel, honored his wife Ronit with a contribution toward the field school. Why did you decide to go beyond Nepal? And what have been the challenges of doing so amidst COVID?
So first of all, I also want to mention one of the listeners, Carmela Eigen, whose wonderful husband, she came as a volunteer with her husband, also to do Shabbat and to teach, and she's a preschool teacher. And after her husband's untimely passing, she also helped to sponsor work in very significant work in Nepal. So just a shout out to Carmela. So we, it says in the one section of the Zohar, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he says, how long can we stand on one pillar? To create a stable organization, you really need more than one venue. We needed to, Nepal, the situation there is that things are always changing. The government can decide they don't want NGOs anymore. Many things can happen. And that's one thing. So if we wanted to also be working in more than one place at once, we wanted to expand to Africa. And then of course, Africa is a place where there's probably more need, than anywhere else. So it was very important to us to expand to Africa. And also in the sense that our young people, our staff, who many of them who want to go on and potentially make careers in international work, it's very important for them to have that horizon too. But the main thing is Africa is it touches our hearts just as Nepal does. Zambia is a very hungry place. The work we began there can have such tremendous efficacy with such small which relatively small inputs, you can affect the lives of hundreds of people. And it's just a joy to be in Africa. Also, there's a tremendous spirit there. Nepal is hugely fascinating because of Buddhism and Hinduism, but in many ways, the Africans are closer to us emotionally. They're more open. And it's wonderful to work in both places.
Now, I imagine for your volunteers and even for yourself, dealing with intense poverty is new. What do you see for your how many volunteers have you had in the course of Tevel over these 14 years?
I'd say we've had about 1,500 altogether.
Wow, 1,500 people who've given significant time in working with the seriously poor. What do you think is changed in them in working with people in intense poverty?
I think that there are many things to learn. First of all, I hope that they come back and they understand, first of all, that they can really change the world. That even if they're changing the world one person at a time, but to have that feeling of empowerment that you really can do something. And especially since, as I said, we focus on getting to the roots of poverty, that they see that they've been part of a larger organization that really is doing important work, and to have that feeling, I think that stays with a lot of them. At the same time, I think that they also learn in many ways, how to appreciate life, because people who are living as impoverished people do, with much less security in the future, there also is, paradoxically, without romanticizing it, there's a kind of a vibrancy of life and an appreciation of the moment that I think that people come back and they take that with them. And I think also educationally, what I tried to help them understand is that they can understand big things as well as little things. They can understand the life of poor people and how it can be changed with relatively little input. And at the same time, they can understand why there's poverty, and that things like economics are not only for scientists, but they are value laden, and that they can actually understand and then work to change what needs to be changed.
You mentioned the Knesset member who's one of your alum. Share a little bit more about the impact your volunteers have, what ways it's impacted them in terms of the choices of careers for themselves.
So I just give a few examples. One of our alums who was also was a staff member for 3 years, came at 24 years old and left at about 27. Yotam Politzer is now the head of Israel's largest disaster relief organization, IsraAid, which is actually, in terms of its budget, even much larger than we are. And he's running that, and is also looking for Tevel alum to help him with that. We have another alum who actually was only on a 1-month program, but it really changed his life, and he came back, and he's now the head of a organization called Shar Shivayon, which means it's a soccer organization that works with underprivileged young people in Israel, including refugees, and he's the head of the whole educational department for that. We have the first rabbi who she graduated JTS and also did a master's in international development at Columbia. So I think she's probably the first rabbi to have, to do both those things at once. So many, many examples of people who have gone into organizational work, doctors, people who are now doctors who use our community. One of our doctors, one of the people who went to medical school after Tevel B'Tzedek, he is doing a long-range study of Bedouin health and trying to understand how the community structures affect that health. So people take, I think, that understanding of how important community is, and the ability to work between cultures, and to understand also that it's important to keep connected and deeply rooted in your own culture while you're reaching out to other cultures. I think that they take that, many of them have taken that with them.
And on the flip side, in that Shabbat and in our time in Nepal, we're also hosted by one of your key professionals who was Nepalese, Bishnu Shapake, who went to Israel and became Dr. Bishnu, studying agriculture at Ben Gurion University, brought back his education and became your leader of the Nepalese partners that you had. What's been the opportunity with Haifa University? Say a word about that, and opportunities of people to gain, and who were not Jewish, gain skills in Israel and bring them back to their countries.
Right. So first of all, both in Burundi and in Nepal, we've had internship programs where we match with the longer programs, 6 months to a year. We match international volunteers, either from Israel or Jewish diaspora, with local post-college young people that have been very, very popular. So we've trained a lot of young people, both from Nepal, from Burundi, and then also our staff members. Many of them have come to Israel for trainings, and then some of them we've sent, like for example, one of our star Nepalis, BJ, has been, we sent him both to Burundi and to Zambia to help us start up there. We call that South on South. We're now starting a master's program at Haifa University in Jewish thought and global community development, global social justice. So I think it's the first master's program of a kind that combines those two as its emphasis. So it entails a year, really just everything. We're hoping to pack everything into 1 day in Haifa, 1 day a week in Haifa, and then 3 months with us in either Zambia or in Nepal. So we're really looking at ways also to expand the intellectual, infrastructure that we have, connecting Judaism in a deep and rooted way with global social justice, which also includes environment. Now you cannot separate the two.
That I'm glad you touched on climate. This is an opportunity of the people who've been sharing to have their voices heard with their curiosities for you. I see that Ari has posted a lot of helpful links as well. Ari, I turn it over to you first to see what questions you might begin to follow up with what Micha has shared, and then to have those who've been listening to put in the chat some questions as well.
Sure, we already have some questions in chat, but I'll start with a few questions to warm us up. So Micha, are you writing anymore? You started off as a journalist. Do you continue to write as a journalist, or are you full-time doing nonprofit work?
Well, this year has been the COVID year, and we've been really hibernating. And yeah, that's something Ellie brought up that I didn't manage to talk about very much. I can talk about it. So I spent a lot of this year writing, and I'm actually finished the first draft of a book, which really talks about my journey, both my Jewish journey and my journeys in the developing world that helped me get to Tevel B'Tzedek.
Okay, we look forward to hearing more about that book. So please do share that. What's the name of the Knesset member that you mentioned that is from?
Ram Shefa.
Okay, I found him.
He's from the Avodah party. He was in blue and white, and now he switched to Avodah.
And people I think are familiar with Israelis going to India. My understanding is many Israelis now go to South America. So is that correct? And if so, are you looking at projects in South America?
It's true that many Israelis go to South America, but still people also, well, I guess not in the COVID year. I don't think people are traveling, but the only time we've really worked in, I guess, the Caribbean, not even in South America, is with Haiti, when we were in Haiti, working for 5 years after the earthquake. South America, so far, it presents sort of logistical problems because it's so far from Israel. So we prefer right now to stick to. There's plenty of work to do in Africa and Asia.
Right. What's the name of the Ethiopian organization that you started that helps Ethiopian?
It was
Israelis?
called the Israel Association for Ethiopian Jews. Now it's called Association of Ethiopian Jews. Instead of for, now it's of, because it's really totally run now by Ethiopians. I'm on the board still, but
I think it's a project we talked about when we done a whole series about different subgroups in Israel. And one of them was the Ethiopian Jews. And so we talked about them as a group. Also, we also focused on major protest movements in Israel, and one of them was about Ethiopian Jews and
Mhm.
their rights. Another question that came up is from Bimya. So, and it's a question that was on my mind as well. You wear a kippah. I assume you wear your yarmulke when you're doing your work in Nepal and maybe in Zambia. I don't know whether you wear your yarmulke or you have your head covered in a different way. Talk about your interactions as being a representative of Orthodox or traditional Judaism, and then the other groups, the non-Jewish groups. You're obviously working with in those places. Is it respectful? What's the dialogue? And I assume, I mean, do you ever get people who then decide they want to become Jewish? That's not your goal, but is that a side product of something that happens? Maybe, possibly, but more about your interactions and being,
Right.
religious interactions with the different groups.
So every place is different. In Nepal, people don't know that much from Judaism, but they do know about dietary restrictions. So they know, because of the Brahmins and vegetarianism and different things like that. So that's something that they definitely understand. They understand culture, religion, and ritual. In Zambia, it's very Christian. So they have this many of them have this deep love for Israel. I think oftentimes the villagers aren't so sophisticated in terms of knowing, all about different religions and et cetera. But what I found is that especially the villagers and also the staff, they respect the Israeli connection and Jewish connection to our own history and our culture. And that's something that deeply resonates for them because they're very connected to their history and culture, and they're looking for models of how to at the same time take advantage of what needs to be taken advantage of in modern life, and at the same time to retain the best of their tradition. So they really see us as potentially as a model.
Do you do? I mean, I understand from Rabbi Spitz that you do text study with the people in the group. So
Yeah,
can you tell
totally.
us about the text study, what you do, and also do you do text study with the non-Jewish volunteers, the people you interact with?
Okay, so just to start with that, with the non-Jews, that the one thing that we had to overcome in Nepal is that sometimes people would think we were missionaries because there are a lot of missionaries there. So we really don't try to bring religion into our work with the villagers. When we have Nepali or Burundian interns, then we have more of a chance for cultural exchange. And I remember it was Simchat Torah, where it was much easier to get all the Nepalis dancing than it was to get the Israelis dancing. So they do appreciate and love that. But the text study that we do with the young Israelis and young Jews is really designed to show that there is a spine running through the Torah, running through the tradition, with certain basic ideas about social and economic justice. That it's not just a random, tikkun olam, be nice to people, sort of vague. I like the term tikkun olam. I have nothing wrong with it, but what we try to show is how specific that spine is, and doing it through text study of the Torah, of the Talmud, of some of the Hasidic tradition, of modern philosophers. So,
well, not to put you on the spot, but since you are, practicing Orthodox, and yet you go out and do all this good work, and you just said that there's a spine, there's a text in the Jewish tradition to do this type of work. Why is it that this type of work is generally not done in the Orthodox world? You would find it in the Reform world, conservative world, Reconstructionist world. Jews who don't affiliate are very involved in many projects around the world, but Orthodoxy seems much more focused on the Jewish world, maybe Israel, and maybe within Israel only a certain part of the Israel work. Yet you argue that this would be a responsibility for everybody, including the Orthodox.
I wouldn't say that's absolute. There are organizations like Uri Litzedek, and there are Jewish Orthodox social justice organizations. But you're right, and I don't think this was always the case. I mean, Jews were sort of ghettoized, so they didn't really have a lot of time or a lot of power to influence the outside world. But when they moved out of it, like I'd say during that period from the 1880s through Second World War, there were many figures in Orthodoxy who were outspoken in their advocacy for social justice, whether you're talking about a Rav Kook or a Hillel Zeitlin or a Rav Yehuda Ashlag, the great Kabbalist. And I think that what happened was that the Holocaust in the state of Israel, founding the state of Israel, the Holocaust was very, very devastating for the Orthodox world, and as for everybody. But I think that a huge amount of their world was completely destroyed. So they became much more insular. And then they saw, then the ones that came to Israel or America, they had the other problem of trying to create their own insular world so that they weren't influenced. And then with the more modern Orthodox, I think they've been so focused on, again, on Israel and on building society that social justice has, it sort of dropped off the scene. The truth is that at the beginning, the religious Zionist parties in Israel were very much, towards social justice. And then after the '67 war, they became involved more with the project of the settlements and of other things. And it's been a long process. I wrote an article about it, but it was a long time ago, so I can't remember everything I said. But I did write an article about social justice and orthodoxy and why it sort of, dropped off the map or petered out.
The question that came up, I think that relates to what we just talked about is, so how are you perceived in Israel? Are you mainstream in Israel? Do people know what you're doing when you're in Israel? Do you get publicity for the work that you do, or do you feel that you work a lot kind of in the background? You get the benefit of your work.
We get some nice publicity, like for example, on Yom HaAtzmaut this year. So Yediot Achronot, Ynet. You know Ynet? So they're the major paper. So they honored me as one of the 10 Israelis who are good for the world. They did a whole spread on me and on Tevel B'Tzedek. And I was named, a few years ago, I was named as one of the 100 most influential Jews. I think that's ridiculous, but that was somehow happened from Ma'ariv and Jerusalem Post and so on, Haaretz. So we get intermittent publicity, and I think a lot of the young people who travel know about us. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in Israel, and from many people, we also get criticism from the left and from the right. Both of them, the left will say, "Why aren't you helping the Palestinians? You're doing, whitewashing by showing how good Israelis are, And then the right will say, "Why aren't you helping Jews? What are you going around the world helping other people? You can help people right here." So I've sort of been an expert in answering those questions. So we also get criticism, but we do get publicity.
Do you get support from the Israeli government?
We get some support, and hopefully we're going to be starting to get more. The Israeli government has, first of all, the embassies in the various countries we work, if there is an embassy, have been very helpful. They always help us. They help us with visas and with all kinds of issues, and they help. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has helped us a bit with money, but they've been really starved for money. Netanyahu cut back their budgets over the last 10 years, but now we hope to get money from the Ministry of Diaspora started this program called Shalom Core, which is really to fund organizations like us, of which I think we're maybe the premier one. And it's essentially to bring diaspora Jews together with Israelis to do this kind of work in countries in Africa and other places. So we're going to hopefully start to benefit that after COVID.
Barry asked a question about, you said one of your focuses is to help the women, empower the women. Yes. And he said, well, what about the men? So I assume the men are busy working, but I don't know I assume you focus on men as well, but can you address his issue about what about the men?
Yeah, I agree. What about the men? I'm a fan of men as well, being a man. But I have to say that the women are an extremely positive potential power, and many of them have never been in a group before. Many of them in some of the villages we've gone to never have expressed themselves as individuals. They're always the daughter of, the daughter of, or the wife of, or the mother of. And so to unleash their power, is really remarkable. And I have to say, I don't like to say this because, as I said, I'm a fan of men also, but women have a tremendous concern for community that men sometimes don't have, and a concern for children and for education. And so to help give them power within the larger community is often very, very positive for the community itself.
How has the work of Tevel influenced other organizations in the work they're doing? Like, there are lots of NGOs in Nepal or in Haiti. Has there been a sense of partnership or impact there?
So I want to just tell this anecdote. It's a little bit free association, but in Haiti, we were in the refugee camp that was really being run by Sean Penn and his organization. And one of the things that came out that was good, I think, for Israel was that Sean Penn, who was quite radical left, saw the incredible work of our volunteers and how dedicated they were. And he actually went on record as saying that he thinks that America should now have a mandatory service year because he sees how the army has really affected the young Israelis and given them, that kind of enthusiasm and ability to believe in themselves to change things. I think that we have certain deep beliefs. We believe that you can't just throw technology or throw money at a problem in the developing world. You need to really help organize the community, stay in the community for a long-term period of at least 3 years in order to really create change. And I think that has had influence. I know at least one organization in Israel that we've that's changed their policies and changed. I think that we've stood for within Israel for the idea that this kind of work, it says in the Tehillim, it says in the Psalms, Ashrei, how does it say? Ashrei Maskil Eldal. Happy is a person who really deeply understands what needs to be done for poverty. And I think that that's what we've tried to stand for and have started programs for that and teaching with that. So I hope that we have affected, yeah.
So Rabbi Spitz mentioned about his Shabbat in Nepal. By the way, I was gonna label this Catman Dude, for you. However, it's been taken by someone else, so we can't use that for you. But
it's Catman Jew also.
Catman Jew, right? So Rabbi Spitz said he spent a Shabbat, maybe longer, up there. Is there when it's safe to travel? If Marion Brockett wants to get on an airplane and go to Nepal or to visit or volunteer, can people come and either like observe or even volunteer? I know you focused on younger people, but if you look around the room, our group is a little older. But if we want to send Vivian Berger, who does so many great things here in Orange County, California, if we want to send her to Zambia or to Nepal or any place, can she go? Is this something that will be available one day?
I think that is possible. I mean, the reason that we've more focused on young people is because we like to work in a group. We like people to be organized in a group and to start and to end at the same time, not to come as individuals, because that really helps the work and our ability to organize it. But I think that we'd like to at some point get into organizing older people because they have so much to give, and they also potentially have time. So I think we would like to get around to it. We've also organized trips. For example, a couple of years ago, we did a trek in Nepal. We both saw our work, and then we did a trek and teaching on the trek. And we want to do some more of that. We'd like to do more of that.
One thing we talked about was to maybe get some ideas. I mean, people can go to the website that I put in the materials if they want to support Tevel B'Tzedek and your work around the world. But a nice thing would be if there's a micro project that we as the CBI community or the CSP global community can do, even if it's investing in some of your biogas toilets. Seems like a great way to help out in a small way, but to help communities. So please do share ideas of things that we can.
I think right now what we really would like to do because we're focusing now on getting started in Zambia is the big problem in southern Zambia where we're working is water. And the fact is that they do have a water table under the surface, and we're going to be trying to do some digging of wells and digging of wells combined with drip irrigation, but along with sort of agricultural training and things like that. So I think that's the kind of project, some component of that project we'd like to, maybe we'd like to pitch to you.
Okay.
Send you it.
Keep us surprised. Jennifer Malvin asks, what role for good and for bad has the media played in addressing poverty? Since you were part of the media and still part of the media, and you're also part of addressing the social issues, do you have something, comment on that question?
I mean, I think too that often the media is attracted to crisis and attracted to disaster and attracted to drama. And sometimes it's harder to realize how the everyday grinding situation of poverty is. At least there are many people in villages who don't have water and don't have sanitation and don't have food, even though that's their normal. That's their normal. And I think sometimes the media misses that. Obviously, without the media, we would really know very little about anywhere else in the world. So obviously, they also do play a role. Yeah, I think that more and more, what I'd like to see is how to create channels where people in these countries are recording and writing about themselves. And I think that would be a worthy project, and to see how that can, there could be direct connection. Why shouldn't there be direct connection between people and other people in stronger countries? Although I have to say that I feel like that the gap between the developed and the developing countries is maybe less stark than it used to be. I think we're all realizing how we're all in one world and we're all in one boat. And that's also a Rosh Hashanah message. Rosh Hashanah is all about the whole world together. God's kingship over the whole world, praying for the whole world, praying for the time when goodness and divinity will reign over the whole world. So on the one hand, it's scary. Climate change is scary. And a lot of things that are scary about the world. But I think we're finally realizing that we're all in this together.
We have time for maybe one or two last questions. So I'm looking here and see what people ask if you collaborate with USAID projects. But in relation to that, I guess my question is, aside from your own nonprofits, is there another nonprofit that you look out at and say, wow, we should all take notice of that? Yeah, particularly if it's a Jewish one that's doing great things out there.
The American Jewish World Service, it's not doing volunteering programs anymore, and it never has really done work on the ground, but they are brilliant at advocacy. I think that they understand many issues very well, the larger and political issues. So I would say to take a look at them. I think Israel does good work in terms of disaster relief, for sure. And let's see if there are any other Jewish groups. I think the Gabriel Project in Mumbai is a nice project. They also started working in villages. I feel like we were able to help influence how they're going about doing things. Yeah, there are some good projects. There's a project called Cultivate, which is an Israeli agricultural expert, a young man who helps train agricultural experts in Ethiopia, although now Ethiopia is really a difficult place. So he doesn't work so much at the level of the actual villages, but he trains experts and spreads that knowledge. Yeah, there are actually a lot of, there's a wonderful project from Hadassah Hospital called, I'm going to get it in a second, but what it does is help eliminate worms and transmissible diseases all over Ethiopia and in other places. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, what a great program. I wanted to thank Rabbi Spitz for bringing you to us, again, on short notice, for you taking time to be with us, talk about your personal journey from Yale University to Zambia and Nepal. and for sharing the
And
work you do and
Jerusalem.
why it's important in Jerusalem, and sharing why it's important for us as Jews to be involved in this project. I think, again, we're not sending Marian Barakat over there quite yet, but we can send our
Soon.
grandkids and our kids over who have graduated from college. I think that's the prime
Gary
years, right?
was there. Gary from I don't know if he's Tustin or Newport, but he was there. I'm grateful to him, and just Ellie was there, and Ellie and Linda. And Ellie's been such a good friend to me for so long and helping me with this project. So you're connected. Your community, your synagogue is definitely has a deep connection to Tevel B'Tzedek.
And I'll do a shout out to Robin Rue, one of our young people who, after the Peace Corps, volunteered for Tevel as well. So I'll just emphasize for all of us that we now know more about Tevel. For our young people, this is an opportunity to make a difference in the world and to find a deeper sense of Jewish impact in doing good for others beyond the Jewish community. And I just close again to thank you, Ari, for enabling others to learn about the work of Micha and Tevel B'Tzedek, and to say, Micha, you walk the talk. Over a long time, you have made a difference for all the volunteers and for the volunteers on those they have seen as fellow children of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Wishing you all a relaxing Shabbat. Lot to think about. The news is really grim this week, so it's good to meet with people who are trying to change reality. And wishing you all as I said, relaxing Shabbat, a great weekend. Hope to see you on Sunday. And Micha, hopefully you enjoy your time in our community here when you get down from LA. Everybody else, take care, be safe, please. A lot of people I know are getting sick now. Way more now than a year ago. And that's, they're not getting as sick, which is great because we're mostly vaccinated, but they are getting sick because we're not as careful. So please just be careful out there. We want you to be healthy. We want you to have many years of learning, and we want you to be able to get on an airplane and go to Zambia or Nepal in a few years. So you can only do that if you're healthy. Take care. Thank you again. Bye, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos.